Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Get out and vote. If you're living in one of the 5 states holding elections today, here in our home state of Virginia, the results could have national consequences. Will the outcome be a bellwether for 2020 election? And why have billionaires like George Soros poured money into the Democratic races here? Gary Lane has the answers.
Voters in Louisiana, Mississippi, Kentucky, New Jersey, and Virginia are making their choices for state and local offices. Virginia, a reliable Republican state for 50 years, is now leaning blue. And what happens here could be a bellwether for next year's general election. Donald Trump lost the state to Hillary Clinton by 5% in 2016. The state assembly is almost evenly split. Republicans hold a 1-seat majority in both the House and the Senate. Todd Gilbert is Virginia House of Delegates Majority Leader. He says outsiders have spent big money in hopes of changing the balance of power in the Commonwealth.
The amount of money coming in, mostly from the Democratic side, billionaires like George Soros and Tom Steyer, the environmentalist, and Michael Bloomberg, all pouring millions of dollars into Virginia races to try and reshape our state and ultimately reshape the country.
1 week before Election Day, more than $82 million had been spent, making this the most expensive election in Virginia history. And perhaps more than a bellwether, this vote could test Democrat voter enthusiasm, following a blackface scandal for Governor Ralph Northam and sexual assault allegations against Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. Caitlin Conant is political director for CBS News.
I think it's a sign of just enthusiasm and how much voters are fired up and ready to get out there. And I think Democrats are trying to go down ballot. We saw them make efforts in Wisconsin in the midterms, and they're really hoping to make some gains in the state legislatures.
Gun control and health care are the top issues for Virginia Democrats. The Cato Institute's Michael Cannon.
Republicans just don't do health care. This has never been one of their strong suits, and it's a real and decades-long problem. It's one of the reasons we got the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is because Republicans have paid insufficient attention to this issue.
A large turnout of pro-life voters may make a difference to keep red or purple states from turning blue. Many Virginians were outraged when Democrat Governor Ralph Northam appeared on the radio advocating infanticide. Vice President Mike Pence raised the abortion issue at Get Out the Vote rallies in Virginia and Kentucky.
At a time when leading Democrats advocate late-term abortion and defend infanticide, I promise you, this president, this vice president, and your governor will always stand for the right to life.
Pence and the president will be watching the Virginia race closely. It's a key southern state. What happens here could make a big difference not only for Virginians, but for Donald Trump's re-election chances in 2020. Gary Lane, CBN News.
The CBN News political correspondent David Brody is joining us now. And David, what do you think it's going to mean for the president if the Democrats take Virginia? Of course, they pretty much got it, but the legislature is still in the hands of the Republicans.
Well, let's start with this, Pat. First of all, Virginia, obviously a big deal on Tuesday. There's no doubt about it. Now, for the president, we need to take a step back here. And let's remember, President Trump is not on the ballot. So in a way, it's good news for the president, even if it goes south in Virginia, so to speak, in terms of Democrats winning. Trump can say, look, I'm not on the ballot, and that does make a difference. It's true. But at the same time, we need to watch for enthusiasm tonight, especially in that Loudoun County. As you get into some of those Washington, D.C. suburbs that are very anti-Trump, does the enthusiasm carry on up in that area? I think that's what we're going to be looking for. Look, about 30 to 35% or so of Virginia voters typically come to the polls in an off-year election like that. That's of 70%. That means 70% of registered voters are not even coming to the polls. So about 30, 35%. If the number is north of 35%, that's a very good turnout, and that's bad news for the Republicans. So we wait to watch, especially on the enthusiasm aspect of all of this.
Well, you know, I have never seen this kind of money before in the history of Virginia. I mean, this is an off-year election, and the money is pouring in from Soros and Steyer, and Michael Bloomberg is coming into Virginia and they're spending millions of dollars. What do you think? We're now 1 year away from the 2020 presidential election, and 3 months from what's coming up in the next election. So, do you think Biden is going to keep his lead in the Democrats? Do you think he's history?
Well, Biden is on thin ice big time, and here's the #1 reason: Joe Biden. I mean, he's his own worst enemy. And then after that, Elizabeth Warren's a very close second. She's done well. And then you throw in the Ukraine situation, and that's been a problem for Biden as well. And why is that? Well, because, look, when you talk about the Ukraine situation, here's what people in middle America think. Old school politician, conflict of interest, bringing his son on board. We don't want any of that. And that's why Donald Trump was elected in the first place, because he wasn't one of those old school politicians. So I think it hurts Biden. But once again, back to Elizabeth Warren. She's the one to watch here. And I got to tell you, some of these polls that we've seen just recently, and, you know, I'm not a huge fan of polls, especially this early out, but this New York Times poll is very interesting because it actually shows that none of the Democrats, Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Buttigieg, none of them have been able to really flip any sort of Obama district that went for Trump. In other words, these are districts that went for Trump that used to be Obama districts. They haven't been able to make any headway in these districts. That's good news for Donald Trump coming up in 2020.
Well, Trump apparently is leading in these swing states. I mean, we're talking about, well, I don't know about Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, those states that carried the day for him. Are they going to hold, do you think, for the president in 2020?
Well, so far, the empirical data shows that, yes, as a matter of fact, in this New York Times poll, he is not only just doing just as well in many of these swing states, he's actually doing better in some of the swing states that he lost. So in other words, electorally at least, if the election were held today, the polls are suggesting that Trump could actually win by an even bigger margin. And this has been the concern all along by some Democrat activists that I've been talking to, some strategists. They are concerned about a roaring economy, about a Donald Trump who knows how to brand an opponent. I mean, look at what's going on with impeachment right now. You know, the Democrats are trying to figure out what the one line of impeachment is for this. It's very confusing. Donald Trump has one line: read the transcript. It's the Make America Great Again. And now here we go. Read the transcript. As a matter of fact, in Kentucky Monday night, there were a lot of folks, a lot of supporters behind him with the Read the Transcript T-shirt. He's able to make it very simple, and that's a problem for Democrats going forward.
David, my prediction has been all along that the Democrats in the House don't have the guts to take an up or down vote on impeachment. There's all this talk and all these hearings and all this stuff, but when it comes down to the final vote, I don't think they're going to do it. What do you think?
Well, I tell you what, there is a school of thought, Pat, for sure about that, and there's a lot of reasons for it. Number one, they might have a timing problem just to begin with. Look, I'm looking at the week of December 16th. That's the week before Christmas, obviously, and the week before Congress gets out of there. They're going to have to take a vote that week. There's no doubt about it. If they don't, then you run the risk going into January, and then you have voters scratching their heads. They're already scratching their heads. But in January of 2020, an actual election year, they say, why in the world are we impeaching a president when in 10 months we can decide whether or not we want to vote him out of office anyhow? So, you know, there's all sorts of political problems for Democrats to do this. And it is true, Pat, that eventually some of these swing districts that we've been seeing, you just wonder if that vote will ever come to fruition. And part of the problem here isn't just timing, but what will the Democrats' actual articles of impeachment be? They think they have so much material to work with, that could actually be a problem because they're not going to be able to necessarily hone it down into some sort of coherent, final, connect-the-dot strategy. Because, Pat, I got to tell you, they may think there's a lot of dots around Trump right now, but what's the connector? They have not been able to connect these dots specifically, and that's a big problem.
David, thank you so much. We look forward to your analysis as we get closer to the election. David Brody. Well, in other news, a deadly plot to blow a synagogue to smithereens foiled by the FBI. Ephraim Graham has this story and more from the CBN Newsroom.
Pat, a Colorado man is in custody for plotting to bomb a synagogue. He is accused of posting messages of hate online and wanting to start a race war by bombing Temple Emmanuel in Pueblo. FBI agents posing as white supremacists met with him, bringing pipe bombs and sticks of dynamite. The suspect reportedly saying, quote, "This is absolutely gorgeous," as he examined them.
According to the complaint affidavit, Mr. Holzer self-identifies as a skinhead and a white supremacist. Mr. Holzer went on to suggest to undercover agents that they use explosive devices to destroy the synagogue and, quote, "get that place off the map." Mr. Holzer also stated that he was not concerned about any loss of life from the attack because such victims would be Jews.
Authorities consider the case domestic terrorism and a hate crime. The U.S. is officially pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo submitted the formal notice to the United Nations Monday, beginning a year-long process. Pompeo said the deal is unfair economic burden to the U.S. economy. The U.S. signed on to the 2015 Paris Accords under the Obama administration. It requires nations to set goals for cutting back on carbon emissions, which are blamed for global warming. The U.S. is the first of 200 signatories to break away from the deal. Pat?
Well, you know, the great polluters, frankly, are the Soviet Union and China. China has more pollution than you could imagine. I've been over there so bad that you could hardly breathe. On a Sunday, it was so bad you could hardly breathe. And Beijing is just a mess. So they aren't in this climate accord. So what we're doing, and Trump said exactly right, that this is a bureaucratic move to lower the influence of the United States, period. And this is not a good thing for America. Of course, we're going to do everything we can to limit climate pollution, and we have been moving toward natural gas and other means of energy that are less polluting. The United States has taken giant steps in the private sector to do that. But why should we cripple our economy when these other guys aren't moving theirs? And I think that's the big thing right now. Well, there's something else we've been talking about here. We've done a show called A Nation of Criminals. We have more people, ladies and gentlemen, incarcerated in America than Russia and China combined. I mean, it is horrible. In the so-called land of the free, we have thousands of laws that put people behind bars. It is a crazy thing. Well, there's a good news coming out of Oklahoma. Ephraim?
Pat, in a move hailed as a giant step in criminal justice reform, Oklahoma commuted the sentences of hundreds of nonviolent offenders. More than 400 prisoners were released in the largest single mass commutation in the country's history. A law signed early this year retroactively reduced sentences for those who committed low-level crimes, leading to the release. The commutation will save taxpayers about $12 million. Pat?
I would question that number. I think it's closer to $12 billion that's going to save them, because locking people up each year, what is it going to cost? $50,000 to send somebody to prison?
Well, and for some of these crimes, they're really low level.
Well, it's insane. I mean, you know, somebody's got a couple of joints of marijuana and they put him in jail for 10 years, 15 years. I mean, they're just insane, some of those penalties. And we were so-called, if you weren't tough on crime, you couldn't get elected. Well, it's high time we open our eyes and say, look, this is crazy. And especially when these agencies put in these draconian penalties. You know, it's one thing if the federal government has federal laws, but the agency laws with criminal sanctions are just proliferating. There's several 100,000 laws. And we have a very excellent professor at Regent University, Jim Duane, who's a Harvard guy, and he wrote a book. He said, you know, always plead the fifth. Whatever they ask you, don't answer any questions. I plead the fifth. Of course, you incriminate yourself. There's always some law that you may be breaking. So don't get hung up in the bureaucratic maze. Anyhow.